All right, so hopefully we are here for this session on game sheets, technology, and writing a perfect fiasco. And this is about using the story game Fiasco by Jason Morningstar. It's not a product that I'm here to sell you. I make no money off this in any way, but I do urge you to support the creator of this. They have a great community on several online platforms. Google+, Twitter, YouTube, and others. And we'll talk a little bit about the things that they create. If you really are into this session, I would say take a look at, they have a book just for people wanting to mod the game to their own uses. And that's what I've taken a lot of the things, my cues for when I've worked with my students and some of the things you'll see and hear with this. But this has got more than I could ever give you. This has got people from game design, from education, from just game enthusiasts all contributing to it. It's another great resource. And that link is in the assets within the Google Hangout. Myself, I'm Andrew Smith. I am lucky enough to be employed by Stillwater Area Public Schools, where I get to work with filmmakers, actors, and philosophers every day. I am certified 512 language arts. I've taught everything from English, honors English, video production, theater, and debate, and whatever else they tell me to do. I'm very happy to do that. And these story games have kind of hit all of those things. I've been able to use story games in a lot of different parts of my role, but Fiasco, part of why I submitted this particular session for TIES is this is far and away my favorite student game in terms of for me to facilitate, but it's also my students' exit surveys, this is their favorite game. This is the one they will go and play and buy and do on their own. So I wanted to talk with all of you today about how you could use this with your students in your classroom. And great feedback on this from an earlier session I did. Fiasco really is about creating a house of cards. The story that your students create in Fiasco wonderfully ties into language arts standards in terms of having that 3-act structure. Many states, language arts standards grade 9 and up. A lot of states grade 7 and 8 even set the table for it as well with this. But it's a game about making a story, having these characters, making plans, having conflict, and it all goes horribly wrong by the end. And that's the point with this. The makers liken it to playing a Coen Brothers movie is the kind of thing that they're going for. And it's wonderful. The creativity and the things that it just generates, I love using in this game. I love seeing what students do with this game. There's the manual, it breaks all these things out into separate parts. I like to think of it just in that 3-act structure kind of mindset. And I'm going to talk through this today with you. The setup and first act, how does the tilt come in and define your second act, and how do you have a third act and a montage and aftermath? How does this whole thing end? How do your kids use this with this? And the biggest thing when working with Fiasco is you choose a play set, and that gives you kind of the basic setup for it. The creators of the game call it a trouble construction set with it. And you get these 4 things that you do at the start, and this is a wonderful way to teach some literary elements. This is a wonderful way to work in, if you're not a language arts teacher, to work in your specific content areas. In social studies especially, a lot of the play sets are grounded in different time periods and places. Very, very relatable to other curricular areas. But when you set up your story, relationships, needs, objects, and they talk about this is creating a web. And this is set up for all students that play it. And the quote that this made me think of, because a lot of through the setup phase, they get attached to their character and they get attached to what's going on. But really what we're about is not being the spider or the fly. It's about being the links between it. It's about creating the web and what happens within your story. And that's one of these implicit things that's taught by playing this game that I think is part of just the experience. It's worth doing just for that reason. And play sets are great. Play sets, there are, I want to say in the assets I've given, there are over 30. The play sets can range everything from 1592 London that I use when I'm teaching Count of Monte Cristo or Romeo and Juliet. There are Western play sets. There are play sets, 80s Great Britain for spy kind of novels. There are Arctic Research Station, a la John Carpenter's The Thing. There are all sorts, there's a John Hughes Suburbia kind of setup one. There are play sets made every kind of thing out there, and they teach you too. And I've given you the tools in the links here also where it's for how you can create your own play about that. But the first thing, if you were to just play this for the first time, your play set often will have a score. It'll talk about the tone of the world that you're jumping into. And really what they're trying to do is get you hooked up using that play set, but also give you the feeling of it. They also include a movie night, usually 3 or 4 to give you the feel of it, engaging some student choice play sets. I'll have them YouTube the trailers for these, kind of things like that. Sometimes I'll create things to go with it as well. One kind of caveat with using the play sets. Most of the play sets include Insta setups in their last page. I don't always recommend this. It's a nice way if it's a casual afternoon kind of do, but sometimes the instant setups try it or they kind of go a little lowbrow with things. I've had better luck when players straight up go at this legitimately, create their own relationships, needs, objects, and locations, and go with it that way. So I take the Insta setups with a grain of salt when looking at a play set. It's when I have students make play sets, I don't know if I always have them do that because they can get locked into character ideas that are maybe not as authentically their own with it. So to use your play set, you've got these sheets printed out. They're all tables with 6 cells with 6 items within each. But what you need really are 4 dice per player. Fiasco likes to default to a 2 red, 2 white. 2 white, 2 non is kind of just what I go with it. But these dice are taken, everybody rolls it right in the center. And that is just plain fun, playing with dice. My 3- and 5-year-old love this. There's just something wonderfully visceral about it, but it also builds in. So you create this big pool of dice in the center. What cares here, the one numbers facing up are the options for your game sheets. So sometimes when you get that blank page syndrome, when you're trying to write, that this kind of takes that out of your hands. And that's one of the wonderful things with this, is you can always fall back to the dice. What are the dice that are there for you with this, in terms of this? And you go back to these things, the dice that face up, these are numbers. Again, all of the cells are numbered and all of these things. So you're placing dice, and these set up your relationships, needs, locations, and objects with this character, with your characters with this. And I recommend going after them in that order as well. Start with the relationships, go to needs, locations, and objects. So relationships. Relationships are the most important one, and that's why I'm starting with these first with this. Wonderful thing about building in student engagement as well. Every player, whether you're a group of 3 or a group of 5, which is the range usually of players with this, you have a built-in relationship with a player to the left of you and one to the right of you. So if you're in a group of 3, that really builds in a lot of connection. If you're in a group of 4, you've got one character across from you that's not related to your character in any way. There we have a potential for conflict with it. These things right away from ground zero with this. It's just a wonderful way to get things going with it. How does this work in a play set? Everybody takes turns placing dice, and it's grounded in divider-chooser mathematics. Divider-chooser, game theory math, you've got cake, pie, something that somebody wants, and you got two people working with it. One person gets to divide the resource, the other one gets to choose which part they take. That's the way the dice work when you're doing this. A character create a relationship with the person to the right of me, but I don't get to define it any further. I might be able to create this family relationship, but I don't get to say what kind of family we are. Or similarly, the person to my left, they might say, well, we're in a crime relationship, but I get to choose that I'm the henchman to their mob boss. Or however I want to define that. You know, whatever my 6 options are and whatever the dice have, that's what I can do with it. It's important that no one person can both create and define. You can't have a player both set and define a relationship. This builds in, again, engagement. Everybody's involved in creating the characters and what they've got. They've all got say in it. There's not the as dictatorial group member kind of thing that can happen with it. This game just doesn't allow it from how it's built. Now, needs, after we've got everybody at the table has the relationships with the characters to the sides of them, needs are very important. I encourage people as they're doing this to spend the dice down. You should at least have a need if it's not also defined. Your need might be to get out, and then it gets further defined, a backwater town. But you can play very well with the need of just to get out. It might be the need of to get out of whatever the situation is with this. It's okay to have the need undefined. Needs affect objects and locations, however, which is important to take into place. Objects and locations are wonderful kind of randomizers within the game. Great for your play sets. I kind of go back to the idea of Chekhov's gun with this, though. If you set an object within the game, you can't exhaust everything with it. There's a whole separate sheet of 6x6 with these options in there. So it's impossible to have it all with it. But whatever you do have has to be used. And importantly, if I define an object, you know, something lost, and my relationship defines it as the embassy's microfilm, well, then that's something between our characters. How are we going to work in the embassy's lost microfilm in what we're doing with this? So it's kind of like a secondary writing prompt within it. And it's kind of an interesting thing to, again, build engagement with this. Will Wheaton on his YouTube channel, Tabletop, has this great quote. I've got a link to the playset or his playthrough of an entire game of Fiasco, if you ever want to watch that. I do caution, it's not always the best thing to use with younger students because it's a Studio 54 playset that Will Wheaton sat down with the designers and wrote. But it's a great way for you to get a look at people playing it and people that are very good at it. But in it, and that's such a great way to get students in touch with their writing, is to think about what is this character, what do they need. This goes into a lot of Stanislavski and Strasberg acting training, as well as persona kind of prompt writing things. But also the objects and locations, it gives it an outlet. It gets them to the table and gets them playing the game and their stories with this. How do you know that you've got enough in setup? You've got all these dice, you've got the kids there. How do you know, what's a good way to know when you've got actually enough stuff set up with this? And that's one thing where Fiasco being an analog game is a benefit. You have these visual cues with this. You can ask, well, what's your relationship over here? What's your relationship over there in terms of that? What kind of details? Usually I just say one detail to each relationship. That could be need, location, or object. But again, it keeps enough stretch and comfort going in there. I probably should have asterisked this last one on here. the last wild die. Fiasco has this ongoing, regardless of phase, rule within the game that the last die is always wild. And this is another one. I think it goes right to student engagement and right to keeping your players interested. It's a great setup that they're going with this storyline that they like, this world that they're creating, but they're stuck with this number they don't like, or they're stuck with this thing they don't like. That last one is wild. And they can put that wherever they need it to be for their story. And that, I have just seen wonderful touches on writing with that last wild die. And I encourage you, if you go into using this game or just play it for fun, please hold true to that rule in terms of honor your story, honor what your players are doing, keep that last die wild. Let it fit where it needs to for your story. And this is kind of like what a game sheet looks like. This is one of the templates my students had, and they're placing, their white dice were category. In this case, they were using green dice, and these are the options they were setting under it. And it just, again, it creates that nice visual progression. They know who's got what, and then they can circle things in if they really want to do that as well. But after we've set this up, after you've got your play set, you've figured out who the characters are, what is this world, what are the locations in it, what kind of objects are we going to have to interact with, all the dice go back into the middle and we start to play scenes in Act 1. The hardest thing for students to get a hold of is the difference between establishing a scene and resolving a scene. This is probably the steepest learning curve in playing Fiasco. If I'm a player and I'm establishing a scene, I set out all the W questions. I say, where is this going on? Who are the other characters? What are we doing? Things like that. And then I play it out with whoever else it is at the table. But the 2 or 3 other sitting there, when they're doing this, they're watching what the other 2 are talking out. And they take one of the dice from the middle, and it becomes an outcome die. And if it goes well for that character, or they think it should go well for that character, they give them the white die. If they think this is going to end poorly, they give them the red die or the green die or whatever die you've got with this. That's if I establish. If I set the W questions, they give the die to me and influence the outcome of the scene. So there we're collaborative writing again. In terms of resolve, and this is, students really kind of come into this in different ways. A player that wants to resolve, they're going to say, okay, I want this to end well for my character. They're going to grab the white die, let's say. Well, everybody else at the table then comes up with the W questions. They say, where is the character? What's going on? Who are they with? And then they start playing out the scene. They should be playing to their needs and the other things that have gone on in the playset. So that's the big difference, establish and resolve with this. But here's the kicker with Act 1. After a scene is done, and everyone should be taking a turn. That's another thing, is everyone takes a turn, either establish or resolving. In Act 1, you make plans. And again, this goes with a lot of our language arts standards about the exposition within a piece. Their characters make these plans that are going to go awry. But after a scene, let's say that I chose to establish the scene, and as we're playing it out, they said it's going to end poorly for my intrepid spy that I've got in the British Embassy. With it, well, I've got that non-white die. I choose to give it to another player, and it stays with them. So the only way you collect dice in Act 1 is by other players giving them to you. And hopefully you work to some of those details. Maybe you've worked in a location in Act 1. Maybe you've worked in an object in Act 1. And sometimes the students, I like to have them either circle those things on their play set or cross them off as they've gone to keep another, again, a visual track or a visual record of these with it. But we play Act 1 until half the dice are gone. And then we start to go into Act 2. Now, when we teach it with the little drawing the mountain outline and things, we talk about complications and things like that for characters traditionally. Fiasco uses the tilt. So when we get down to half of our pool of dice has been played out to different people with this, we take the remainder, they are in a pile in the middle. Everybody looks at the dice that they've got, that other people gave them. They roll them. And maybe I've got 2 white dice and 1 green die. And my white dice total up to 10. My green die was a 6. Well, I would be a white 4 is dice math. You add your like-colored dice together. Whatever number is greater, you take away the lower number with it. Well, the score in white, the person with the highest score in green or red or whatever, they get to decide the tilts. And these are 2 complications that come to the game. And it's the same way as before. It's the same mechanic. You have a sheet, table of 6 options with 6 things within each with it. And again, just like before, I can say maybe I want this tilt to have betrayal, but the other person gets to decide what kind of betrayal it is. Maybe the other player, they say, well, we want a tilt to be from innocence. And I get to choose which of the 6 options based on the dice sitting there go into that. So again, you only have the 2 tilts with this. They have to be used by Act 3. And that's one thing to stress of this. That's after the establish resolve issue, using both tilts can be a struggle for students. That can be very difficult for students. But by the time your 3rd act and your montage rolls around, then you need to have used those with this. And again, these exist within character relationships. So if I didn't previously have a relationship with the other character deciding the tilt, now we do with this. So again, we keep tying the characters together, keeping the students engaged within this. We don't ever have any, we don't ever have somebody just sitting there with this, with the rules of this game. Now in Act 2, again, everybody takes at least, but it's different. Outcome dice, regardless of establish or resolve, you keep them. And the pace usually quickens for students in Act 2. Things get a little bit quicker. They like having, they like seeing the collect with what's going on. And this is the plans, hopefully the plans that they've made in Act 1. Maybe we've started to see why that microfilm is lost in the MC with this. We should know where all the details fall. Again, let's say there's that last scene that you're playing and you're wondering what this, how should the outcome go for these 2 players. If you've only got a green dice sitting there, you can choose to make that a good outcome. Again, keep that last die wild, base it on what's going on, and stay true to the story with that. So Act 2, a similar setup, but the dice are kept. And it quickens the pace. Students, I can almost see when they get into Act 2, without even having to look at their sheets or look at where dice are, they're just playing quicker. The scenes are take on a more interesting pitch with it because they know they've got to hit these things. And this is where some of the creativity really sparks with this. Why I've got this image here is I say Act 2 is when the Icarus comes out in blood with this, where these things start to fall that you didn't know that maybe could go wrong within the storyline. And the energy in the classroom gets very interesting with it. But now everybody's got dice in front of them. There are no more dice out in the middle of the table. What do? We're in Act 3. We are in the aftermath now, and we're leading towards our montage. Dice math happens again. I take all of my white die, all of my red or green, whatever color I've got die. I roll all my dice. I add the things together. I take lesser from greater. That number goes into an aftermath table. And I've got a sample aftermath table in the links for you there. Players that don't engage, people that don't play a lot of scenes in Fiasco, things don't end well for those characters. It's very difficult for some of those characters. It's very hard for a student to completely game their outcome in Fiasco with this because the dice are rolled, because you have so many dice involved, because you have other students giving and receiving dice throughout this. But the aftermath table kind of sets their fate with this. And the aftermath table I've included is a little bit different than the one in the game book. It's been a sanitized language-wise a little bit for kind of the PG audience with that. But the point is that the player's fate is sealed. I always struggled with creative writing assignments with students' conclusions. So often students just got into a deadline or they just stopped. They didn't have a definite end. Well, in Fiasco, the end is quite clear and in some cases quite awful with it. But the end is known. They know where they're going with their writing because of this. And the fate is sealed. So the montage is the last part, and it's a very different, it's a very quick type of gameplay. Again, they've got their dice in front of them, however many that may be, and every die is a line or a scene within the montage. And I like to use this is as just kind of the sentence starter for them. And they all go around taking turns. And I think it's just a wonderful phrase used in the game books. They call them one-line requiems. And depending on if it's a white die or non-die, some rule sets even say that's the tone of the scene in the montage. So if you've got a character that's been collecting a lot of red dice with it, oh, their montage is wonderfully brutal. And every line, it gets a little bit more, but they can't pile it on. They can't get gratuitous with it because they have to shift scene with this. And they take turns, and so this kind of tailspin gets built. And you can kind of see this happen with this. And the aftermath, whatever their aftermath table is, and again, it's something I like for students the first time to play it, they just circle their aftermath, and I can say, how are you getting to whatever on your sheet? And they can tell me with it. Their Fiasco and with this. And it's a wonderful game for it. The best student writing I've had in the life has come from playing this game. And that's part of why I came to this session, to do this session today with this. So again, when you get through the dice, the story is done with this. And why do this? What does doing this kind of thing get for you as a teacher, as somebody working in the classroom? You do get excitable readings, but that's them. I mean, they're fun for me to read. Oh my goodness. I love reading student work in Fiasco. I grade that stuff quicker than anything else I've got. It's great. Some of that is built in where you've got a lot of formative assessment built in with the dice and having this visual progression always out on the desk or the table with the students that you can kind of track to make sure where are they in the writing process with this. You can see it around there. The dice are kind of this visual progress meter for you. And it's very easy for you to facilitate in your room going between tables or clusters of desks. You can just eyeball where they're going with things with this. But they get fired up doing this. Again, it's wonderful for keeping track of them. It's also great because you really don't have to have any one kind of. I've had a lot of slideshows because the segmented nature of the medium is helpful for which scenes go where for the students. But I've had students do great things with a Google Doc. Create them in their notes. I've had students draw up graphic novels using this. There are people that do these for screenplays. There are online communities for using Fiasco to create screenplays. It's out there. So the product you create really can plug into a lot of your different standards or different things you're trying to do. I've had people do persona poems to a scene for their character. I had somebody do an acrostic poem for their character's aftermath. And they had this thing that they went through with it. It was great with it. One of the reasons I like Fiasco is this last bullet here, and it's taken actually from improv acting. If you work with improv or you teach improv to students, one of the things that you have to work in is the idea of gonna make you look awesome. And if you Google that with improv, you'll find a lot of wonderful kind of teaching. It's that, yes, it's probably more engagement, but they learn to be successful if they're gonna have a good story, have a good time in class. They need a principle in that they need to make each other look awesome with this. Regardless of how they give the die to one another, if they're gonna get it out there. And this is what I do with students that are a little more hesitant or maybe a little more nonverbal with how to play this out with this. I talk this out about. They're gonna make you look awesome. It's in their best interest. It's in the best interest of everyone at the table for the students taking part to have good work. Their work is dependent upon it. And this idea of gonna make you look awesome is in terms of what I've seen my students do with this game and that you consider doing with this. I didn't want to put up the QR code for feedback for the session. I've got the URL as well as on the resource sheets with this. So please feel free to give me comments. I was this close from doing this as a multi-hour interactive workshop instead to do a little more hands-on with this. If you think that's something that you would like to see or have me do. Were there things that were just terribly unclear? Please let me know. That's how I get better with this. I am going to stop the live broadcast and take questions that all of you have and talk a little bit more about classroom experiences with this.